Welcome to This Explainer. I'm so glad you're here because today we're going to do something really cool. I'm handing you a literal decoder ring from modern media. We swim in this massive sea of words every single day. News alerts, advertisements, political speeches, corporate emails. And it's so easy to think of language as just a harmless way to share information. But what if I told you there are invisible power structures hidden in the everyday language we consume? Today, we are going to learn exactly how to see them. Let me ask you a question. Is there a difference between a freedom fighter and a terrorist? Objectively speaking, right? Those two terms might describe the exact same person doing the exact same thing. But man, the choice of word completely rewrites reality. One makes you a hero, the other makes you a villain. That tells us something fundamental. Language is never just a neutral description of the world. It is an active tool used to shape it. Okay, let's dive into this. The official name for what we're talking about today is Critical Discourse Analysis, or CDA for short. Basically, it's a transdisciplinary approach, meaning it grabs tools from linguistics, sociology, history, media studies, you name it, to study how power, dominance, inequality, and resistance are expressed and reproduced through discourse. Just think of CDA as your X-ray vision for spotting hidden bias and ideological framing in absolutely everything, from the nightly news to the ad scrolling on your phone. Here's our quick roadmap for the explainer today. First, we'll see why language is never neutral. Then we'll look at the 3 dimensions of discourse, crack open the analyst's toolkit, move beyond words to images and data, and finally, wrap up with using language for good. All right, part 1. Language is never neutral, uncovering hidden power. So, we've got to shatter this illusion right now, that words are just harmless little things that mirror the world around us. In critical discourse analysis, there's this foundational idea that discourse and society are mutually constitutive. What that actually means is the words we use don't just reflect our society, they actively build it. The philosopher Antonio Gramsci had this brilliant term for it: hegemony. Hegemony basically means power isn't just about pure force. It operates through consent. It operates through what we just accept as common sense. When certain ideas get repeated enough in discourse, they become normal. We just stop questioning them because they feel like the natural order of things. To break that down a bit further, scholars Norman Fairclough and Ruth Wodak outlined 4 core principles of CDA. First, social and political issues are actually constructed in discourse. Second, power relations are negotiated through it. Third, discourse reproduces social relations. And fourth, ideologies are produced in it. Notice how proactive all of that is? The big takeaway here is that CDA doesn't just look at boring grammar rules. It always starts with a real-world social problem. Moving right along to part 2, 3 dimensions of discourse, the blueprint. So how do we actually go about analyzing all this? Well, let's move to and see how this builds using Norman Fairclough's famous 3-dimensional model. Let's unpeel the onion. Step 1 is the text level. That's the literal words, the grammar, the metaphors. Step 2 is discursive practice. This is where you ask, wait, who produced this text? Who is it for, and how is it being consumed? Then step 3 expands out to social practice, looking at the broader institutional ideologies and historical power relations at play. You really have to look at all 3 layers to get the full picture. Okay, section 3, the analyst's toolkit, reading between the lines. Now it's time to get practical. Let's open up our toolkit and look at some rapid-fire, real-world examples of how grammatical choices manipulate our reality every single day. First up is nominalization. That's a big word, but it just means taking an action, a verb, and magically turning it into a noun. Compare the government increased taxes with the increase in taxes. Do you hear that? That second phrase completely hides who's doing the action. It makes a deliberate, human-made policy sound like some abstract, inevitable weather event. It totally removes responsibility from the actors involved. And here is an absolute classic you see in PR all the time, the passive voice. Specifically, the agentless passive. The CEO made mistakes. Well, that clearly assigns blame. But mistakes were made? That is the ultimate shield for the powerful. It completely obscures responsibility. It admits a problem happened, sure, but completely dodges the blame, protecting whoever actually caused the issue. Next up is transitivity. This simply asks who does what to whom. Take a look at these 2 framings of the exact same event. Demonstrators were violently dispersed by police. That highlights the police as agents of force and the demonstrators as victims. But flip it, police restored order after demonstrators disrupted. That shifts the agency entirely, right? It criminalizes the protest and legitimizes the police action. Now, strictly speaking, neither sentence is technically false, but the grammatical structure completely changes the ideological perspective. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how simple words define identity. This is called nomination, or lexical choice. Calling a group of people illegal outsiders aggressively constructs a dangerous outgroup. It taps right into a nationalist ideology. But calling those exact same people asylum seekers invokes a totally different framework of international law and human rights. So lexical choice is literally never neutral. It tells you exactly what worldview the speaker wants you to buy into. And there are plenty of other tools in the analyst's kit, too. Modality looks at certainty. Saying someone must do something asserts way more authority than saying they may. Presupposition hunts for hidden assumptions baked into a question. And metaphors? Those are incredibly powerful. If politicians constantly frame immigration as a flood or a wave, they're using a natural disaster metaphor, and that subtly shapes what kinds of harsh, drastic solutions seem reasonable to the public. Moving to Section 4, Beyond Words, Images, and Data, Scaling Up the Analysis. But hey, this isn't just about isolated sentences. We need to expand our lens, because these hidden power dynamics exist in massive datasets and visual media too. To avoid just cherry-picking one biased headline, analysts use something called corpus linguistics. Basically, they use software to crunch huge databases of text, hundreds of thousands of words, looking for collocations, which are just words that habitually hang out next to each other. For example, if massive media datasets show the word immigrant is constantly paired with negative verbs like flood or nouns like burden, it statistically proves that the prejudice is systemic, it's naturalized, it's not just a one-off mistake. We also have to talk about multimodality. This is how images, layout, and even color carry ideology. Seriously, even bland, everyday commercial texts are highly ideological. Picture a luxury airline ad showing a smiling, bow-tied butler serving a cup of tea to an executive in a first-class cabin. It's not just selling you a flight, it is naturalizing an extreme class hierarchy. It presents social stratification as if it's just the organic, unquestionable, natural order of things. In fact, commercial platforms often strip the political reality completely out of images just to make them universally marketable. Think about how stock photos on a site like Getty Images deal with a complex issue like climate change. By blurring out backgrounds, using generic models, and avoiding specific geographical locations, they decontextualize reality. They take a severe, highly political global crisis and repackage it into a generic, safe, green issue. And making that choice? That is a deeply ideological choice that completely downplays the actual crisis. All right, final part, Section 5, Using Language for Good, Fighting Back. So we've seen how language and images can be used to manipulate. But let's pivot for a second, because if language can oppress, it can absolutely liberate too. And this brilliantly illustrates the difference in how we actually teach language. On one hand, normative language awareness just teaches people the correct grammar rules so they can conform to society. But critical language awareness, that treats language as an active site of ideological struggle. Instead of just teaching conformity, it equips learners to question why those conventions exist in the first place and whose interests they really serve. The end goal isn't just passing a grammar test, it's active democratic citizenship. Which leads us to positive discourse analysis, or PDA. If traditional CDA is all about exposing the bad stuff, the negative abuses of power, PDA is kind of the antidote to cynicism. It focuses on how marginalized groups use discourse to assert their own agency, how leaders negotiate peace, and how language is actively used to build community and construct a much better, more inclusive world. So the crucial point here is this. Critical discourse analysis is not just some dry academic theory meant to gather dust in a textbook. It is a vital, real-world survival skill. Once you know how to spot passivization or nominalization or hidden agency, you literally can never unsee it. You graduate from being a passive consumer of media to being an active, critical participant. Now that you have the decoder ring, I'm challenging you to put it on right now. As soon as this explainer ends, take a look at the news, open up an ad, or read a political statement. Stop and ask yourself, who is really speaking here? Who is being hidden? And what hidden assumptions are lurking in the very next headline you read? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy decoding.